Here we go. So good evening, everybody. And it's really exciting to see everybody again, and especially our friends in Ukraine. It means that you're safe. Hopefully it means you're safe and you're here again. We're spending some time together and we're learning how to help other people. And I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again and again. Part of the energy that helps Ayelet and me to do all this is that we're inspired by you and we're inspired by your country in the way that you're showing up to this situation with tremendous courage and bravery, and it's just incredible. So it's our honor to be together with you tonight. So we're going to talk now about grief and guilt and survivor's guilt, and I'm going to stick to the topic of grief, and I'm going to expect Ayelet to jump in at any time. She's older than me, wiser than me, and she has to take revenge for when I did this to her in the first session. So Ayelet, of course, just speak up if you need. If you need to come over to my house, give me a slap or whatever you need to do.
No worries.
So we're going to talk about grief. And, every disaster or trauma situation has its own unique characteristics. And I've been involved now in many large-scale disasters for many years and thousands of small-scale disasters, like babies not waking up in the morning, people that die by suicide. And every single disaster has its own characteristics. It has its own nuances, its own unique parts of the story, its own unique needs that you have to answer those needs if you want to be successful. And one of the unique things that I'm noticing about the Ukraine story, which is so sad and terrible, and we really support you. So one of the unique things about that story is that it's an enormous amount of people. It's tens of millions of people in your country. You have a large country. And at any given time, the invasion is affecting many different people in many different ways. And this is different than a car crash where, let's say, the father of a family dies and it's over and that's it. And there's an investigation and there's a funeral and people have to grieve afterwards. Here you have an enormous, beautiful country. And I've been to Ukraine many times, by the way. I don't know if I told you that. And my family is originally from Lviv, and I'm very proud of that. When the invaders are moving from the west to the east or to the south or to the north and whatever's going on, it means they were in one location before, now they're passing through to a different location. Some people were harmed a lot, and now less so because the invaders have left. And other people may get harmed, God forbid, more so because the invaders are going in their way. Some people may have had their houses robbed, destroyed. Maybe they had to leave the country. Maybe people suffered a death of somebody that they loved. And so there's so many different things going on. And one of the things that Ayelet and I want to reiterate and remind you is that anything you hear in this talk, make sure that you think about how it applies to you personally or how it applies to the people that you're reaching out to. Because everybody's holding in a different place in this story, even though you're all in the same situation. And so that's the really unique characteristic that I'm finding in this situation. And I spoke to somebody yesterday who was talking to me about how to, he was asking how could we support his friend. I have a friend who lives in a place called, one second, the name's gonna come to me. Okay, I'll get them later. But it's a suburb outside of Kiev, very beautiful place. And I've actually been there before. And a friend of his who lives there, his house was destroyed and then people stole what was left of it. And he was saying, how can we support that person? So everybody's holding somewhere different. So that's the first thing I want to share. Okay, let's try to think about how does this apply to us? Take what's relevant to you and what's not relevant to you, that's okay. Maybe it's relevant for somebody else. The second thing I want to mention is that we're not going to talk tonight about really deep therapy or processing grief or complicated grief. We're going to talk in a moment about what grief is, and I'm going to open the presentation, and I'm happy to send it to anybody Aliona has it, and she can share it with anybody that asks for it. You know, sometimes people grieve and then they get stuck in that place, and the grieving process is very difficult for 5 years in a row, 10 years in a row. And that's obviously not what we're talking about tonight, because we're in a situation which is dynamic and it's still going on. It's not finished yet. And people are busy. War keeps people very busy. We've had a few wars over here. It keeps people busy. There's a lot to do. Things are disrupted. It's complete chaos. And so people aren't sitting down for the most part right now and deeply thinking about what's going on and really processing those feelings. Now, that being said, there might be somebody like that, and that's okay too. So if you're that person, or you know somebody like that who is processing those feelings, that's also possible. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to open up the presentation. And we're going to talk about acute grief. So could everybody see my presentation? If you can give a thumbs up. Yeah, great. Okay. So the name of the presentation is Acute Grief. And acute is, you know, that's the stage that I think we're holding in right now. Acute is—
I'm sorry, Avi, I'm sorry for interrupting, but I think we have lost our translator for a second.
Okay, okay.
Let me check. Олю, вже все? Okay. Okay, we can continue. Thank you. I'm
Great.
sorry.
Thank you. Okay, let's jump in. So we said just now that, you know, everybody's on a different timeline when it comes to grief and when it comes to trauma. And the way that each person experiences this war or this situation is going to be different depending on their personal circumstances, where they live, their family situation, financial situation. Are they in the military? Do they have somebody that they love in the military? On so many levels. Here's just some examples on the bottom. The enemy is in my town. He's on the way to my town. He just left my town, and so on. Okay. When it comes to grief, I'm afraid that my missing uncle is not alive, or my uncle is seriously wounded, or my uncle has died. Okay, so you have all these different situations. And you know, and then you have a timeline, not just where I'm different from you and you're different from somebody else and they're different from a third person, but even by myself. Let's say my uncle died in the war a month ago. That's different than if he died last week, and that's different than if he died today. And so all these things are changing, and our needs as people who are grieving are going to be changing as well. And it's a developing story, and feelings that didn't yet come might come later, and feelings that already came may return. And it's very dynamic when you talk about grief. So what is grief? Grief is the natural reaction that a person experiences in the body and in the mind upon suffering a loss, okay? And when we talk about loss, it can mean anything. It can mean our business. It can mean our dreams, because imagine a young person who was studying in university and he was going to finish his degree, or imagine a couple that's engaged and they wanted to get married. Everybody's life plans are just thrown out the window right now. So buildings are destroyed, plans are shattered, relationships, people are separated from one another and they're missing one another. People are dying. Some people have been sexually assaulted and brutally harmed in that way. And there's a lot of different types of loss. So it's not only about people dying. There are many types of grieving about different things in this story. So if grief is about the feelings that we have when we lose something, so there's something else called anticipatory grief. And that's basically the feeling that we have when we expect to lose something, okay? So it's something that didn't happen yet, but we kind of feel or expect it's on the way. It's gonna happen soon. And this really hits us very hard. And we grieve in this way as well. So grief is very interesting in that way. So let's say a person got hurt from a mine in the war, and they're in the hospital, and it doesn't look good, but they're alive, and they may be alive for a few months, but from the things we're hearing from the doctors, let's say, we're kind of expecting that things aren't going to go in the way that we want. And we're starting to grieve already now. And that's anticipatory grief. So that's the question. What does grief feel like? And is there a way that it's supposed to be? So grief is experienced by each person in his or her own individual way. And this is really, really important to say. A lot of times people who go through grieving, they feel bad that they're not feeling what somebody else felt or what they read on Google. You know, how come I'm not feeling sad? How come I'm happy? You know, I'm not allowed to feel happy. How come I don't have problem falling asleep at night? My wife died, or who knows what, okay? It's okay to feel whatever you're feeling. And one of the things that Ayelet spoke about in the last two previous talks was really normalizing what we're feeling. And so we're going to normalize what we're feeling when it comes to grief as well. It's normal to grieve like you, it's normal to grieve like me, and we're all going to grieve in a different way. So any sort of thought or feeling that comes up for us when we're grieving is okay. And it's part of the human experience of losing something that's important to us. So there's not one way. It's really, really interesting. Sometimes people feel apathy. In other words, they don't feel anything. They feel numb inside. They just don't feel strong emotions. And that could be for a lot of reasons, but that's a way that people can go through a difficult situation. Other people can be devastated and they just can't function. They can't get out of bed and they don't want to talk to people and anything in between. So these are just some examples. Some people are in shock. They can't believe what just happened. It's surreal. It's unbelievable. Something you can't believe. Some people have great sadness when it comes to grief. Some people are confused. Some people keep having thoughts coming over and over again. I just spoke to somebody now, like 20 minutes ago, whose father, his stepfather, was in a very bad car accident. And aside from being injured, he's traumatized. And so he's having all these thoughts and flashbacks and images coming in his mind of the car accident. Okay, so people have a lot of guilt and survivor's guilt, and Ayelet's going to talk about that soon, but everybody's feeling so guilty that they're not doing enough. And no matter what they do, it's never going to stop the war and make everything better. And so we keep feeling like, you know, I don't care enough. I'm not raising enough money. I'm not doing enough activism. I haven't convinced my friend enough to leave that town. Oh, by the way, the town of my friend is Pedol. Is that the name of the town? Do you know that name? Pedol? Okay, good. I see people nodding their head. Okay. People have difficulty sleeping.
Can you repeat the name of the town?
Pedol, P-E-D-O-L. Is that how you say it? Yeah, I'm not crazy. Maybe I'm crazy.
It's one of the districts in Kyiv, right?
I think so.
It sounds like one.
Yes. Okay, so people have difficulty sleeping. It's hard for them to do tasks, right? They're supposed to cook. They have to feed supper to their family, but it's just so hard to concentrate, or they have to go shopping if that's even possible now. I don't know what you guys are doing. You're going to have to tell us all your stories later. People have to get stuff done, but it's hard to focus. That could be as well.
I want to jump in.
Yeah.
Sorry. Can I jump in for a second?
Always.
Okay. So I just want to say that when you look at all these grief reactions, when you're looking at them, depending on the timeline, okay, when does the grief occur and what is actually happening when you are in the process of losing or you just lost somebody? This is where you want to look at it as acute stress. We talked about acute stress last time that we talked. Some of the symptoms are going to look like acute stress. People are going to be confused. They're not going to make good decisions. They will not know what's hitting them, where to go first, right? You're looking at heart palpitations. You're looking at sweats. You're looking at all the physical reactions that we talked about when it comes to stress and the mental ones that are going to come with. So overall, if you just lost someone and you're during a war zone, you're in a war zone, okay, or you just left the war zone and you're a refugee, at this point in time, we are looking at different kinds of symptoms because you're not just worried about the worst thing to happen, it happened, okay? And what we want to know when we step in as I don't know if we're therapists at this point, but as people that are going as first responders, as far as I'm concerned, mental health first responders in times of war, when we step into the situation, we need to understand that the worst has happened to these people. And right now we're looking at stages of stress, either in its acute response or during this, whatever, because we're in a month in. So we are already in the disorder piece of it. Okay, so acute stress disorder, but it's not really because it's an ongoing and you don't really know what the stressor or the trigger is for each person. The bad news is the worst has happened. Okay, and what we want to know is we want to make sure that we are very clear at what our role is when we touch it. So I'm not going to say more, but I want to make the connection of acute stress with that. Think about the people that when somebody comes to tell them that their loved one is gone, where they faint, right? Think about fight, flight, freeze, right? Faint is another form of this. Faint is where I'm mentally gone and I'm physically gone, okay? Fight, flight, freeze, you have 5x for 5 seconds, okay? Let me, just a little bit thing in parentheses. Fight, flight, freeze, we all know. Friend is an elevated form where in times of stress, I reach out to a friend and I deal with it that way. Faint is at the bottom of the chain, okay, where I can't handle any of that stress. So I'm mentally and physically gone. So we want to look at some of this as stress reaction because we're in a time of war. And we need to understand that on that timeline, okay? Thanks, Avi, sorry.
Oh, perfect. I mean, it's really true. And that's why, you know, in the title of the talk on the presentation, it was guilt, trauma, it was grief, trauma, and guilt. In a way, you can look at a lot of these things as just other types of trauma symptoms that are going on. And in your situation, again, it's all happening at once. It's not like, you know, a sick child who passed away in the hospital. I mean, there's so much going on by you guys. There's so many things. There's trauma, there's grief. It's all happening at once. And it's definitely so helpful to connect that back to traumatic stress. So basically the point of this slide was just to say that anything can happen. You could sleep, you can't sleep, you could stop eating, you can't eat at all. You're confused, etc. So when you talk about grief, just to get into some of the nuances of grief, because that's what we're going to do just for a few more minutes. There's a lot of different models or ways to talk about grief. And this is one of the most famous ways to talk about grief. These are different steps. They don't have to be in order. Not everybody has all of these steps, but these are common things that people do when they're grieving. And so you might see this in yourself. You might see this if you're talking to somebody who's going through grief. And so one of the things people do is they deny what's going on. You tell them some bad news, or everybody heard about the bad news, but there's that one person who they don't want to believe it's true. It can't be, it's not true, it must be a mistake, and that's denial. So we often see that. And this is, you know, based on Kubler-Ross and Kessler. They wrote these great books. And at least in
Arvi, I'm really sorry. Whenever you mention last names, can you either type them in the chat or be very articulate about them? Because I don't know all these names. I don't want to mispronounce them. Okay, thank you.
Sure, no problem. It's not even that important to me that people know the names. The ideas are really important because the ideas help people. But in the United States, there were these big experts named Kubler-Ross. That's one person, Kubler-Ross. And the second one was named Kessler, David Kessler. And they did a lot of research on grief. And they found that these steps of grief are really helpful to identify and notice in people that are going through hard stuff. So the first one we said is denial. They're denying what's going on. They can't believe it. They don't want to listen to you. It must not be true. And they're acting as if everything is okay and nothing bad happened. Another stage, or stage 2, is anger or blame. They get extremely enraged, extremely angry. And it's not necessarily because they have an anger issue during the year. This is a reaction to loss. This is a reaction of grieving. They get really angry. They want to blame it on somebody. I'm sure there's a lot of interesting theories about why people do that, but that's something that people do. It's the government's fault, it's your fault, it's my fault. If only I would have given better directions to my uncle, he wouldn't have driven through that town and gotten killed. If only Ukraine wouldn't have signed this deal in the 90s, then this wouldn't have happened. And we're finding somebody and something to blame for what's going on. So that's very common. And the third thing that we often see is bargaining. This is really interesting. And bargaining is where you stand to lose something and you're starting to kind of admit that it happened. So even a person in denial, they're starting to agree with themselves that the loss occurred, the person died, the house was blown up, but they start to bargain, let's say with God, and they say, God, I promise to be as good as I can. I'll give all my money to charity, just bring my son back to life. So they're starting to do these maybe irrational things, but they're bargaining and they're trying to figure out, is there any last way to return what was lost? You know, I promise I'm never going to be mean to people again. Please just bring back my business, whatever. And that's bargaining. And then people get depressed, understandably. They feel sadness and depression. And this is obviously really understandable, right? You wouldn't diagnose somebody with depression because they just had a loved one that died or their business was blown up, right? Maybe 5 years later, that's a different story, but we're talking about acute grief, things that are happening right now. People feel really sad because sad things are happening. Like Ayelet said, the worst has happened. And then hopefully, most people are going to come to acceptance. They start already to come to terms and to agree with what's going on. This is the situation. This is the unpleasant reality. You like it, you don't like it, here it is. And you have to confront it. And you start to really agree with yourself to go with this situation. You agree that there's nothing to do about it. It happened, here it is. And now we have to somehow reorganize life around the loss. We're going to have our family without our uncle who died. We're going to have food without our business. We're going to have a relationship without getting married this week and pushing off our wedding for who knows how long. And so there's this acceptance and reorganization that people try to do. I'm not saying now that people should do that. Of course they should. But what I'm really talking about is this is what people naturally do. This is a natural step that people do at some point when they grieve. And most people may not even be in this place right now. And who knows when the end of this situation is going to be. We don't really know what's going to happen an hour from now, tomorrow, a month from now. So this is just a developing story. So we're really talking theoretically. And then finally, one of the stages of grief, and this is like really far out there. Maybe somebody now is doing this. I'm going to assume most people are not anywhere near this. But that's when you make meaning out of what's going on. You start to think in a philosophical way. You start to think in a spiritual way. And you start to find value to what happened. You try to say, you know, why did this happen? Why was this important to happen for the world or for the country? If you're a religious person, you might say, why did God make this happen? Or you might say, you know, why was it important for us as a country or as a family to go through this? Maybe we had to learn a lesson from this. Maybe it was to bring us stronger together, whatever it is. But this is something common that people do. They think of something meaningful to justify the pain and the horror and the loss that they went through. So again, this is just common stages of grief that you might be talking to somebody and you'll see that they're showing one of these symptoms. They're in one of these places. I'm going to say something interesting. One of the things that I do amongst many is I am an emergency medical technician. I'm a medic. And so I go to a lot of CPRs, resuscitations of people that just died, and we're trying to resuscitate them. And I do that on the side on a volunteer basis. And I've seen a lot of people die and a lot of family members doing a lot of these steps. So they're in denial, they're angry, they're bargaining. But I want to say just something important. There's a lot of people in the world. Everybody is different. Some people are religious, some people are secular, there's all sorts of backgrounds of people. And sometimes religious people will pray to their God, they'll worship their religion, and this is what they do as a religious person. And if we're not careful, we're going to misunderstand what they're doing as being pathological. And it's not necessarily pathological. It's okay for a religious person to pray. That's the way that they might go through a difficult situation. And I remember a funny story where I was once at a mental health conference in Israel, and I said a prayer over something that I was doing. And a good friend of mine said, Avi, is everything okay? So I said, yeah, what's wrong? And he said, I saw you were talking to yourself. Are you feeling okay? And he thought that I had schizophrenia or something like that. And I was just saying a prayer, that I learned since I was a little kid. So it's just important with the different types of cultures and people that we work with, that when people grieve, they're going to grieve in different ways. In Israel, some people, in order to grieve, they will pull their hair out. They will scream. And they're screaming on purpose as a way of showing respect that somebody died. And you don't need to calm them down, because if you try to calm them down, you're disrespecting the deceased. That's how they grieve. Some women here in Israel, when they give birth, they scream on purpose. I mean, there's a lot of interesting cultural things that happen that people do in a cultural way. So just bear that in mind when you work with somebody who's sad, they're grieving, and so on. Okay, so grief comes in waves. So I could feel nothing now and then feel crazy sad a month from now, and then I can feel good again for a few months, and then it can come back. So the feelings of grief are really hard to feel, and they can come and they can go and come back again, go back again. So it's really interesting that way. So the fact that somebody's feeling good for 2 weeks doesn't guarantee he's going to feel good that way forever. And somebody that felt bad for a few weeks, it doesn't mean he's going to feel that way either. It can come and go. It's very dynamic. And over time, we're going to assume and hope that most people, after the event is finished, which the war is not finished, but hopefully, please God, it will finish today. It will finish right now. And then after this event finishes, we're going to hope that people will process their feelings and they're going to grieve. And over time, most people will go through that process and they'll start to feel relief. They'll start to feel better. And that still doesn't mean that it won't come back on the anniversary of the day that the peace treaty is made, or whatever might happen, or who knows what. Things can come and go. I just heard a really interesting story. For our American friends who are listening, I just heard a story of the Columbine school shooting. There was a really bad shooting in a school in America in the year 2001, I think. So that's a long time ago. And these two boys murdered a lot of students and teachers, and it was a very tragic event in the United States. And there was a survivor of that shooting 20 years later who showed up at the school for an event that her child was going to, and she fainted on the spot from trauma. And then she started grieving. And just seeing this school 20 years later brought up for her feelings of trauma and feelings of grief. So it can be really interesting that way. There's a lot of studies done on people in the Holocaust where you see that trauma can exist many, many years. But I'm not even talking about post-trauma. I'm talking about where you feel good for 20 years, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, grief and trauma cues and triggers can come. And so you might see something that reminds you of what happened, and it can bring feelings of sadness. Maybe, you encouraged your family to run away so that they would be safe. And now they're in Moldova, they're in Poland, they're somewhere else in Ukraine. And, at night you're ready to go to sleep and you see their empty bed. And you're thinking about how you're so lonely and everybody has to be separated. And this can be a reminder of our grief, of our loss, of the way things are sad and have changed. You might see a building that's destroyed. You might see the picture of a person who's deceased, and so on. Okay, so there are things that can trigger us and bring these feelings back, even if they went away. So we're going to wrap up the talk soon and turn it over to Ayelet. So the question is, what could we do if we're grieving ourselves, or if we're working with somebody who's having these really difficult feelings? And grief can be really, really hard. maybe I have it later in the presentation. I don't know where it is, but if people grieve long enough and strong enough and hard enough, sometimes it can bring people to some really bad mental health situations. It can bring them even to suicide. And I just heard a story about that yesterday where 3 different survivors of a certain trauma event took their lives by suicide because of grief and unresolved trauma that they went through. So, you know, this is something we really want to pay attention to and to work on and to manage with the tools that we're going to talk about. So what could we do? What's the practical thing we could do? So I think one of the first things we can do is to be gentle with ourselves and normalize for ourselves the thoughts and feelings that we're having at this time. And it's okay to not function when we're grieving. We want you to function, and we're going to give tools for that. And Ayelet gave some really great tools in the first and second video about that as well. But if you're not feeling like you usually do, well, that's obvious. That's okay. In America, you'd say, duh. It's a no-brainer, right? If you don't feel good because people are dying, people are being raped, buildings are blown up, life is disrupted, well, we understand you. That's normal. That's okay. So to normalize that and to be kind to yourself, be gentle about that. And maybe you want to be a big superhero and you want to do tons of activism and raise money and take a rifle and fight back. And you want to do all this stuff, and that's great and it's necessary and important. But it could be that you're not able to function in the regular way that you usually do. You can't perform the same amount that you usually do. And that's understandable. That's okay. And let the grief take you where it's going. Follow it. See how it develops. Go with it. Roll with it. Flow with it. Okay? Be patient with grieving. Sometimes, I thought about this every time that Ayelet was talking about normalizing feelings in the other talks. Sometimes people are afraid of their symptoms. They panic that they're grieving. They panic that they're traumatized. Oh my gosh, this doesn't feel good. I don't want to feel this way. I need a pill right away. I need to drink vodka. I need to get out of this situation. It's terrible. So we're not saying you shouldn't help yourself. You should try to feel good. But don't be afraid of the feelings. It's understandable. It's normal. Okay? So that's number one, be gentle. There's no need to stop feeling these feelings. Let yourself feel them. Don't push them down and deny them. It's true that Ayelet said a lot of times in the other talks, you got to do. What are you going to do now to follow up with action? What are you going to do? That's for sure always going to be true, and we're going to keep reiterating that and reminding that. But if feelings are coming up, so they're coming up, that's okay. Just notice that. And don't compare yourself to other people. This is something a lot of people do in difficult situations. I compare myself to you and I say, she's crying all day because she really cares, and I'm not crying at all. I must be a bad person. And that's not true either. Okay, so again, we're all going about this differently. And you guys are in a really not simple situation. We want you to be functional, and we want you to do whatever you need to do at this time. So maybe that involves trying to be happy. And maybe you don't have to feel bad about being happy. I remember there was a very big disaster almost a year ago in Israel. A big civil disaster, the Meron disaster, if anyone heard about that. 45 people were trampled to death. And I was working in a group with people at that event. And one of the people said that right after the disaster, he felt so much sadness and so much grief, and he decided he's going to play football. And then he felt so bad that he's playing football. I am the worst person in the world because I'm playing football. Is that right or wrong to think about myself? And I told him, if that's how you're dealing right now with difficult feelings, and that's helping you, that's okay. He was in a group, we spoke about the different feelings, we worked through them, but you're allowed to be happy if that's what you need to do to stay alive, because we want you to stay alive. We want you to eat. We want you to do whatever it is that you need to do for you and your loved ones. So grief a lot of times involves guilt. So soon Ayelet's going to take over and talk about guilt. But there's a lot of judgments that we tell ourselves. I shouldn't be doing this. I should be doing this. I shouldn't be feeling this. I should be feeling this. So this tool is important. If you can use it now, great. especially when things settle down, this is an important tool. So the tool is called self-compassion. And it basically means if I was talking to my best friend and I wasn't in this situation, but they were, what would I tell them? What message would I tell my best friend to support him? Okay, let me tell that to myself. That's the idea of self-compassion. To tell myself messages that I would tell other people, because we really beat ourselves up when we grieve. We really judge ourselves harshly. And so we want to be fair to ourselves. And so sometimes it's helpful to be objective. You know, if I had a friend who his husband died in the war as a soldier in the war, and I was, you know, speaking to them to support them, what would I tell them? Let me tell that to myself. Okay. Self-care. This is really important, especially for all you guys. You guys are so special and ambitious. I barely know any of you, but I follow you guys a little bit. I see what you're doing. You're doing so much for yourselves and for your people. You're very ambitious people. You're amazing. But remember to pace yourselves and to eat and to sleep, take care of your physical needs in a reasonable way. Try to be social, try to call people, check up on people, have a chat, tell some jokes, speak to one another a little bit, stay in touch. It's important to make time to be social, to connect with friends. And it's important, if you can, to make some sort of a schedule in the chaos, if that's possible, because that helps ground us. That helps us to be able to be a little bit more functional with these strong feelings. You know, I'm watching 5 kids at home in the middle of a war, and there's no school, and you know, everything's changed, and I'm not going to work, and I'm with my whole family at home. Let's make some sort of a schedule as best as we can. We get up at this time, we read a book, we do this, we do that, we eat at this time, we go to sleep. That's been found to be a really helpful thing as well. I'm going to give 3 or 4 more tiny things, and we're going to turn it over to Ayelet. When we're having really powerful feelings of trauma or guilt, or grief, sorry, because we're talking about grief, we can use grounding techniques. We can anchor ourselves. So imagine I went today to Ashdod, which is like a port in Israel where they have these big ships. So imagine you have a big ship in the ocean, and the ship can blow in every direction, right? Imagine an old ship from a long time ago. And so you want to stay right here. So you throw your anchor over the side of the ship, and it goes down into the water, and it anchors you. It keeps you in place. It keeps you in that one place. When we're having really powerful feelings of stress and grief, it's helpful to anchor ourselves, to throw our anchor down, to do something that whenever we need to, we can do that thing and bring ourselves back to feeling stable and strong and back to this moment, into myself. It's very easy if I saw some really terrible images in media or maybe outside my house of bodies. I heard terrible news. I can't stop thinking about it. It's distracting. I can't sleep because of this. I can't stop thinking about my uncle who died in the war, and I just can't function. Every time that those strong feelings interrupt me and pull me away, I can try to notice something going on in the present moment, something happening right here. I'm sitting on a chair. Let me just take 10 seconds and notice that I'm sitting on a chair. Let me just take 10 seconds to stop and notice that I'm breathing. Here I am. I notice that I'm here. Maybe I can hear the sounds of what's going on outside, and I'm bringing myself back to the here and now through the sounds around me. Okay, these are different ways to just stop, notice what's going on around me, and to come back to the here and now. Because what happens is, whenever we have really strong feelings of grief or trauma, it's like our ship is getting blown away in a direction that we don't want to go, and we can't function in that place. So anytime that we need to, again, we could just stop and see something that's going on. We can notice the colors in the room, the sounds, and so on. If you're walking somewhere, you can notice your feet touching the floor as you're walking, if that's safe for you. If you're lying down in your bed, you're trying to go to sleep, and you can't stop thinking about if you're going to make it through the night, which is a crazy thing to think about when you go to sleep, you can notice the feeling of your back lying on the mattress, okay? This is a really cool poem. And if it has a translation in Ukrainian and you have spare time in the middle of a war, I encourage you to check it out. But it's an old poem. It's hundreds of years old. And it's basically saying that it's helpful to notice strong feelings like they're guests in a hotel. Imagine that your body is a hotel. And imagine that really strong grief or really strong trauma are like these visitors that come to your hotel. And you don't know when they're going to come because this hotel is, 250 years ago before you ordered a hotel online with a credit card, right? 250 years ago, if you ran a hotel, so as the sun was coming down at night, people showed up at your door and they wanted to stay in your hotel. That's how it worked. And so emotions are like that. Thoughts are like that. These are things that we don't control that much. And they show up out of nowhere. And all of a sudden, some really strong, sad feelings come, or a really scary image comes. What do I do about that? I can fight with it and get angry and anxious about that, or I can be okay with that. I can invite those thoughts into my hotel. I can invite the feelings of grief into my hotel, which means I can be okay with whatever I'm feeling. I can remember that Ayelet and Avi said, it's okay not to feel our best. It's okay for all sorts of things to happen. It's okay. And use the different tools that you hear, but invite these strong thoughts into your hotel. Give them a key to their room. Let them stay in the hotel as long as they want. They'll come when they come. They'll go when they go. And that's okay. And that's how we show that thoughts are fluid. Feelings are fluid. They come and go. And we don't want to wrestle with them and go to war with them. This is one that is really interesting. You can use humor. You're allowed to make jokes during a difficult time if you need to, because we want you to survive. We care about you. We want you to do your best. And sometimes you can make some jokes and you can make some dark humor. You say jokes about things that are so terrible, but it helps you go through that, right? Because when you tell a joke, you're making light about something. Sometimes we see some things that are so hard to deal with, and then somebody says a really silly joke and everybody's laughing. It makes it a little bit easier. It deliteralizes it. It makes it a little bit less heavy, right? I actually subscribe to a YouTube channel that's like supporting Ukraine, and there's all these Ukrainian soldiers saying these really funny, interesting things. As they're going through combat, they're making jokes and selfies and videos. And, we saw the video. I don't know if you saw, probably a lot of people saw this video of the Ukrainian soldiers singing to the Nirvana song like a few weeks ago, which I love that song. I grew up on that song. So they're being really resilient and they're having a good time in a bad place. So we could do that too. And when we use humor, it changes the context about what's going on, makes it a little bit easier. And we're going to remind people not to use drugs or alcohol to cope, because that doesn't work well. And if it works now, it's not going to work out later on. And we always want to invite people that we're working with to ask them, what do you think might help you? And I really should have started the talk with that, because it's easy to be the wisest person in the world and have all these ideas, but we always want to work with the person in front of us, or maybe it's us. We want to trust our intuition, and we want to say, let me think for a minute. What would help me get through these really difficult feelings right now? I can call my best friend. I can call that old friend from high school. I can listen to music. I can, whatever it is. Okay, so don't forget that you're a wise person and you might have your own wisdom about what can help you deal with grief. And like we said in the beginning, and here we're going to wrap up, we're not dealing right now with complicated grief or post-trauma. Complicated grief is this idea where something happened a long time ago, and you were supposed to feel better by now because most people do, and you're still having a hard time. That's not what this talk was about, because the event is still ongoing. And so until it's finished and until everybody rebuilds and comes out of this and things straighten out and get normal, it's going to be a bit difficult. Okay. And like Ayelet actually said in the last talk, I really liked what she said. I didn't tell this to her, so she's hearing it now. In the second talk, she said that it's helpful to view this whole situation as a marathon and not a race. I really like that. So pace yourselves, be patient with yourselves. I hope this was helpful. And Ayelet, I'm going to turn the rest over to you now. Thank you, everybody.
Oh, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So I have a question to you, and actually it's a very important one, and I know you're a religious person. So what do you answer to people when they ask you, why did God allow that to happen to me? And it's a very serious question right now for us.
It's a great question, and I'm happy after this is all over and we're making toasts with beer and we're celebrating the victory to talk about that in depth. I actually have some slides on this. So if you ask for the presentation, you can read it. I'll answer really short because I think Ayelet's going to touch on that. But I think that right now, for a lot of people, it's not the time to, it's not the time for a lot of people to engage or get involved in philosophical ideas, spiritual endeavors, existential ideas. Maybe we don't know the answer right now. And maybe when we're asking the question, it's a rhetorical question. In other words, let me just say like this. A lot of times when we ask that question, it's a trauma reaction. It's a grief reaction. It's not even necessarily that we're looking for an answer right now. And if you would give me an answer, I'd get angry at you because I'm trying to express my anger. I'm trying to express my feelings. And I'm saying, why did God kill my wife? And then you come and say, oh, because it says in scriptures on page 41, oh, be quiet. You know, I'm not looking for that right now, right? I'm just looking to feel sad. I'm looking to get it off my chest. Now, that being said, of course, there are going to be people that are looking for a real serious answer. We could talk about that later. And obviously, I'd encourage each person to go to their religious advisor and talk about that. And maybe there's some great material about that. And I'm happy to do an event on that at the right time. But again, just pay attention if we're asking those questions. Is it a reaction or it's something that we're really ready to hear the answer to now? Maybe it is time to engage in the meaning about it. And that's what we said before. The sixth stage of grief is making meaning about it, justifying why we have to go through it. That really helps us.
I want to say something about that. Don't assume. Don't assume that you know why the person is asking what he's asking. Never assume, especially not in these crazy times. So as far as I'm concerned, if somebody's asking me, what do you think about God? Why did God do this to me? I would want to know why he needs to know this now. Because that would tell me the source of his question. I will not assume that he just wants to, to ventilate. I'm not going to assume that he's already reached the meaning stage. I'm going to ask a question, okay? You want to be very careful because I actually do believe that this is a situation of complex, very complex grief that we're dealing with. And I'll explain in a second, because I want us to take the other side of, I guess, the role of the therapist for a second, okay? When we're dealing with these kind of situations. And if we're going to jump into the seat or the role of the therapist, we want to make sure that we're not assuming skeletons and we're very, very clear of what our role is, okay? So if you guys are okay with it, can you stop the share for just a second so I can kind of see the group?
And if it's okay, I will still ask you in a way, both of you, in a way as a patient, because I received those questions. I received the questions like, why did God did it for me? Why did God did it for Ukraine? So I really don't know what to answer.
I think, like Ayelet said, we can try to understand why they're asking. And if they're reacting, so then that's one direction. But what if they're really asking and they really are ready and need to know and want to know? Well, I don't know.
Would you be prepared for a very, very quick role play? Would it be okay for you?
Yes, Aliona, I want to do that with you for a second. I'm going to ask you, why do you want to know? Why is it so important to you to ask that question?
I don't understand why God is so unfair.
And you're having a hard time with that because what?
Because I trust in God and I always thought it's going to be good in my life. And now I see all of this horror and I cannot cope with that.
So you're saying, I thought the world goes this way, and all of a sudden, all the rules of engagement have changed, and now they're going that way. And it makes me feel, if I'm hearing you right, that I don't know what to expect.
Yeah,
So it
I
kind of
don't know what to
shifts,
expect.
right? It shifts everything for me, and I don't know what to expect. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, you're right. I
Okay.
really don't know what to expect.
Is that a little scary? Because that's what I'm hearing from you. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Now, when you do this, it's more real than talking about a philosophical idea. One of the tools we talked about last time was be accurate. Ask as many questions to get to the subtext of the text. Whatever someone is saying, you want to make sure this is not dynamic therapy, what we did right now. This is CBT to the T, okay? So what you do is you go and you ask what the baseline assumption is. She is scared because the world doesn't have the rules of engagement as she's used to. And that is a very scary thing. It has nothing to do right now with God. It has everything to do with the way she feels about the world. That's okay. My job, again, we're going to go back to the baseline. What is your role as a therapist in times of war, when it's an ongoing crisis? What is your job, right? Ask yourselves always, what's my role? What am I trying to achieve? And what is my, for example, what's my short-term
Ayelet,
goal? What's my
could we-
long-term goal?
Ayelet, could we just slow down a little bit for the translator?
Yes, sorry.
Just a bit.
So-
Sorry.
So my long-term goal and my short-term goals, ask yourselves these things. As a therapist right now, in a time of war, I'm trying to get people to operate from their baseline, to be okay with functioning, to do some processing, but mostly we need them functioning. This is a marathon. We cannot have them fall apart. This is not time for any of the deep emotional stuff. Now, having said that, when people are grieving, you're not going to be able to avoid these trenches, these ditches, right? Where people are just going to fall into them because the worst has happened. This is complex grief because people that survive already have guilt. People that I see a lot of separation guilt, okay? I'll give you just a little bit of an understanding of a context. Last week, I spent in Bulgaria working with in refugee centers that they set up in Sofia in Bulgaria, and working with the staff that is actually talking to these refugees and not knowing really what to do with them. So we did a bunch of trainings there for a whole week from the Israeli Trauma Coalition, trying to give them tools of what to do, okay? And one of the biggest things that we've seen is a lot of people with feeling guilty for leaving some of their families behind. Okay, people that had to leave with little kids are safe in Sofia, in Bulgaria, feeling super guilty. Now, what do you want to do about that, right? Some of them already have grief. Some of them have lost someone. And some of them have so much guilt over the fact that they're safe and their families are not. That's the situation. This is complex everything. Complex trauma, complex grief, complex guilt, complex everything. Always ask yourself, what is your goal? I cannot make someone that lost a husband or a son or a brother feel good. It's not my job. My job is to allow a contained process. A contained process. When I say that, it means we put it in a time capsule. We allow it to happen. We are very, very clear about what it is that is going on, and we move on. The best way for people to cope with it is to have something to do. I will give you an example of a person that I saw in one of those centers, one of the refugees. A man that was there with 3 little kids and his wife, and he was feeling very guilty because he wasn't fighting with his friends. He got a pass because he has little kids. and he was in the Ukraine, he was in Bulgaria, safe. We didn't know that he felt guilty. He didn't come with a sticker on his forehead saying, hey, I'm guilty, look at me. What happened with him is that he was angry. He had zero patience. He was irritable. And you can tell he was having some acute stress. You can just see the stress reactions pouring out of him. But you need to have a good eye for it. Otherwise, you just think he's rude. Okay? So he goes to the center. His fuse is short. He's very irritable. And then he takes 2 minutes to ask questions and to see what's going on. And I looked at him and I said, you look angry. He said, I am. And I asked, what about? You can be angry about a million things. I'm not going to assume that I know what you're angry about. What are you angry about? And he said, my friends are fighting. My friends are fighting and I'm here. Nothing is happening here. He's right. Bulgaria is boring. Nothing is going on there. Okay? He's right. When I listened to the subtext, felt guilty for not fighting with his friends. Okay? So I summed it up for him. Sounds to me like you feel guilty. And he did this. And then I asked the $1 million question. What do you want to do about it? What are you going to do with the fact that you feel guilty? Here you are, safe and sound, in Bulgaria. Your friends are over there. You cannot help them. What are you going to do? What do you want to do? What would help? And he looked at me and he wasn't sure. And I used the model that I showed you guys last time, which is the C-REP model. You give empathy, you give the control back. You ask a question, you normalize things, and you give the control back. And I told him, I said, a lot of men that come from a war zone and feel guilty start take good care of other people's kids. That's what they do. They feel better when they help their friends' kids. And he looked at me and he said, you know what? Okay. He needed a meaningful role. So he decided that the women that came to Sofia that their husbands are at war, he's going to try and contact as many of them as he can to help out. Okay? So I'm not saying that we solved all of the world's problems. I'm saying that we have to say, okay, this is where you're at. We framed it. We know what's going on. What do you want to do about it? And here are some ideas. Our job is to not make them feel good. Our job is to make them work. Because if they feel important, and if they feel like they have something to do with the event, the guilt will eventually go away and it's not going to bury them. Okay? You can survive physically the war. If you're carrying this amount of guilt, you're dead mentally and emotionally. And we don't want that to happen. Okay? So this is like the balance that we always have to do. So keep that in mind where it's always, what is my role? What am I doing? What do I need? So another thing that I wrote to myself here is pay attention to time capsules. We talked about it last time for a little bit. Let's say someone lost someone and they know that they've lost someone. Okay. If they're feeling awful, if they're crying, if they're screaming, if they're yelling, if it just hit them, whatever it is, allow it to happen, but put a time capsule on it. We're going to sit here. Right now it's 2 p.m. in the afternoon. How long do you think you want? And I know it sounds awful, but when you're dealing with stress and acute stress, we are making sure that people are not going to drown into their own feelings. This is not the time. So I'm going to tell them, it's 2 o'clock. Do you think we're going to sit here until 4? Do you feel like this is a good idea? And I have to tell you, most people are going to say no. They're going to say no. Because the minute you start putting it in a time capsule, I'm going to feel awful and I just want to cry. That's all I want to do. And I'm thinking, okay, it's Tuesday. You want to do that until Thursday? And they're going to start laughing because they're going to say, hold on, what do you mean? You allow feelings, but you put a time capsule on it because it makes it manageable, doable, and you give them the control back. The fact that I have an emotion doesn't mean that it needs to take everything and all of me. And we have to remind people of that. We do, we really do. Now, as of guilt, I'm not going to explain to you people what guilt is. I think everybody is aware of it. We are in a situation of complex guilt because the war is not over, because the stressor is not gone, because a lot of the people here are dealing with multiple things. Now, I would love to see, for the people that are listening, in a show of hands, how many of you feel guilty? If you have that little sticker that can help, if you don't, I'm starting to see hands up. Okay. Ask yourselves, why? Why are you feeling guilty? And if somebody wants to share, I would love to know what your answer is.
I actually have a lot of questions to you right now about the guilt.
Because we're talking about guilt that other people have, but we're sitting in a room right now, and almost everybody that I see here has it, right? So we want to understand where the guilt is coming from. Because if you are the therapist and you guys are sitting here with guilt and you're going to be consumed by it, your self-care is already halfway gone, right? It's like the antichrist of the self-care. So
it's a funny question right here, Ayelet. We have guilt of the people who are abroad. We have guilt from people who moved internally in the country. We have guilt from people who are staying in the same place and didn't move because they are worried about their parents or about the kids. We have a lot of guilt that I even cannot describe you, and I don't know how to do with it.
And I'm going to ask you guys, think about it for yourselves for a second. And if somebody wants to share, that'll be great. What is the guilt serving? What is it serving me? It's there for a reason. Usually when I have something, it's serving me somehow. Anger helps me kind of, do what I need right now and kind of fall apart for a little bit if I need to, right? Every emotion helps me do something. Sadness sometimes helps me express my love. It's another way of showing love to someone when I cry when they're gone. What is guilt doing for you? Think about it as therapists that are working in the field right now. What is it? Why do you need it?
Is it possible that it's pushing me to do something or pushing me to be active? Is it the answer or
it could be? It could be that this needs to be your moral push. Maybe. I don't know. I'm not going to assume. I'm going to ask. But this is a question. Think about it as a tool, right? This would be your tool for jumping in as people that are first responders or people that are creating an intervention or therapists. This is your tool. Ask that question. Don't assume. You have guilt. Not why do you feel guilty? People are going to give you that answer. Well, because my family is here, my this is here. This answer, I'm asking, what is it serving you to have guilt? What is it here for? What does it do for you?
Ayelet?
Yep.
I'm going to say something and you'll tell me what you think about it. What happens if you take the word guilt and we switch it with the word responsible? Is that what we're talking about?
It could be. I'm not going to assume. But that's what I'm saying. It could be that a lot of people feel that they're responsible for the situation. It could be. And some people do. Everybody's guilt looks different, right? Everybody's guilt looks different. Some people feel responsible. I didn't convince my mom hard enough to leave Kiev, and now she's being bombed. It's my responsibility. I did not take my brother and just tell him, you're coming with me, you're not staying here, because he was 17 and 11 and a half months, and he could have come with me and not stay and be in the army. I'm responsible for. Could be, but it's not necessarily the case. It's not always. Sometimes it's a call for moral action. Sometimes it's a call for action. Sometimes for everybody has a different take on it. What I'm saying is, if it's so hard to scratch our head and think about it, think how hard it is for other people when they're asked that question to answer it. But what it does is it stops the automated response. Okay? What we're trying to do is we're trying to stop those things that are not very helpful and really put a pause on it. These kind of questions put a pause. So you're not automatically swimming in it and you're bringing it up to awareness. It's a very different tool. It's an interesting, this comes actually from the dynamic piece of my work, but from existential psychotherapy. But this is what we do with it, right? It's here, it's coming up to the surface. Now, not once I'm aware of something, it's very hard to just do it, right? To be an automated pilot. So that's what we're doing here, okay? So that's the tool. You want to ask the question. You want to make sure that they start asking this question. And the minute it's up, you'll see that maybe it's a good way to vomit it out. Because bottom line is there anybody here that thinks that having guilt right now during a war is a good idea? Anyone thinks it's helpful? No.
I still have a question.
Yeah.
So I'm dealing with guilt a lot nowadays, and one of my patients, I can talk about not using the name. He's a soldier and he was injured in the first 2 days of a war. Now he's having a guilt that he's not fighting and all of his colleagues fighting, and he feels that his injured was just a mistake, and it's just like he could be in different ways. So he feels really, really guilty.
Yeah. What's the question?
And the question is how to deal with him.
I'll tell you what I do. I'm not sure this is a good way to do it, but this is what I do. I always tell people when they say their story, because usually people that feel guilty are very convinced, right? They know they're right. And they're very convinced. I should be fighting with my friends. I got shot. That was a stupid mistake. I can't believe I'm here and I feel guilty, right? Okay. So now I look at him and I say, you're right, actually. Okay. What do you want to do with that? Let's say you're right. Let's say we're going to go with your story for a second. I'm going to go with your story for a second because you're telling it to me very passionately. And I'm going to say, well, maybe, okay. What do you want to do with it? Usually it's a risk that you're taking because usually what happens with it, you're going to see resistance. Okay? It's a trick that we do when people are stuck in their opinions, because we talked about him before, and he's been doing this for a while, that little guilt act. So I would tell him you're right. And usually what happens is you're going to start seeing a resistance saying, what do you mean I'm right? I am wounded. I actually have a good reason. He's going to hear himself. If you're going to tell him you're right, he's going to hear himself resisting to you. And that's what's going to move him out. Not something that you're going to say, something that he's going to say. Okay? He's going to argue it. That's one way of doing it. It's a little risky. You need to know what you're doing. The other way to do it is I always ask people to think about their favorite person on the planet, right? Their mother, their father, their kid, their favorite person, and usually a younger one, if you can, and ask if he was wounded in the same way, should he feel guilty and shamed for it? And I would push it even more, right? After guilt comes shame. So I push that. And I'd say, if you're a nephew and he's 16 and he would be wounded and I bet what you're saying to me really is that he should be not just feeling guilty, he should be shameful. And this is where he's going to be the advocate. He's going to jump out and he's going to tell you no. And this is where we talk about the people that we love, and we have to be able to love ourselves just at least as much as the people that we love, right? So there are two ways of dealing with it. This is what I do. I always ask them, if you want to hold into guilt, it's yours. I'm not going to take it away from you, because it sounds to me like that's all he has. Do you have anything else you want to hold on to? What do you want to do with it? If you want to feel guilty, I'm going to leave you with your feelings. I'm not going to take it away from you. What do you want to do with it? That's what matters. Now, one of the things that when we did in Bulgaria was exactly that. It's a strong sentence. And a lot of the times, I think as therapists, we really want to, break the feelings and allow people to feel them and talk about them and go into the process. Sometimes I don't want to take it away from people because that's their only defense mechanism that they have left. So I'm not going to take it away from them. I'm going to tell them, you want to be angry, be angry. Here, you can hold that anger right here with you. Now, what do you want to do? How do you want to proceed? I'm not telling you to calm down, and I'm not telling you to not be angry. I'm not telling you to stop being sad. You just lost someone. Be sad. Hold it here. What do you want to hold on the other side? And people have answers. You would be surprised. People have answers. They would say, okay, if I don't have to defend myself and give you my anger, well, I want to go and work here. Go. If I don't have to defend myself and give you my sadness, right? Because they don't want to let it go sometimes. And it's okay. That's the idea of letting people just feel what they feel right now. This is not a good time to kind of go through all of it and dive into it, because the last thing you want in the complex grief and trauma that people are going to break. Because then you got yourself a whole lot of different scenario, when the war is over. If that makes sense. I hope it makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Well, it sounds like there's a certain level of inaction that some people might have because of difficult thoughts or feelings. They're not doing more of something they can be doing to function on an ideal level. And it sounds like a lot of what you're talking about is to help prompt them back into action, get them moving, make them work, I think you said. And then I suppose that even after they're working, there's still going to be some lingering thoughts or feelings. And, and for that, we have those other tools that we spoke about. And it's all true, all together. We're trying to get people, like Ayelet actually started the very first talk in the first video. We're trying to get people as close to the baseline of functioning as we can. And there's so much to do and people are busy. And to survive, you got to do stuff. And that being said, even if you're doing stuff, difficult feelings are going to come up. Difficult thoughts are going to come up. So it's all true altogether. We're going to move people from inaction into action. And then there's still going to be that other part. Yeah, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that another piece of it is psychoeducation. Psychoeducation is huge. So you explain. People that go through grief, usually that's what happens for them. And you adjust people's expectations. We talked about it like when we talked about the vaccine, right? If I know I'm going to get the second vaccine and I'm going to feel dizzy and I might have these side effects, if I have them, I'm not worried. Because somebody explained to me that these are the expectations. This is what I'm supposed to expect. So it sits in the same place. When you're grieving, expect to be irritable. It's normal. When you just went from one country to the next and you left your parents in an area that is being bombed, expect that feeling. It happens to everyone. What do you want to do with it? That's yours. But the expectation really helps, because I can tell you, we're having an awful time right now in Israel. Okay, we're having crazy terror attacks day after day. In my hometown, we just had 2 in the past 24 hours. Okay, it's crazy. And I was just in Tel Aviv yesterday, and I did like this process group with people that were on the streets, where this guy came out and just shot a bunch of people and killed a bunch and wounded a bunch. And so these ladies came and we did like a process, just something to help them with it. And one of the things that they were saying, one of the ladies, she was walking in and she had tears running down her cheeks. And she just looked at me and she said, I don't know what to do. It's been like this since Thursday, 4 days, right? And I looked at her and I said, well, that's normal. That's actually normal. You can expect that to actually happen for a few more days. because one of the stress reactions that we have in acute stress is the fact that you're just going to have these waves of tears and waves of crying, and you have no explanation for it. It happens. And that lady looked at me, she said, really? Because I thought I was going crazy. Like, no, that's what happens. Okay. One of the ladies said she cannot, she's jumpy. She's jumpy because the shots were really next to her house. And I'm like, okay, you're hypervigilant. That's normal. And you're gonna expect to feel that for a few more days. This is gonna take time. Adjust their expectations. We didn't do miracles, but I have to tell you, they walked out of there 2 hours later, feeling a little better. Now, my job is not to make them feel better. My job is to give them tools, okay? And to see if they can use them or not. And that's for them. So if we're having guilt as therapists, that we're not helping enough, that we're not doing enough, adjust your expectations. It's the same rule. It applies to everyone. Okay, adjust your expectations. If someone just lost their father, do you think you can bring that father back? No. Do you think you can restore his faith in the universe as he knew it? No, it's not your job. Adjust your expectations. You're right there. First, so somebody will not feel like he's in distress alone. You're listening to them. You're allowing them to talk. And you're giving them different tools to see if they can keep on using them or moving with it. Okay, Avi gave some grounding techniques. Some people are going to use them and some people are not gonna. But your job is to give them the tools. Your job is not to do it for them. So I want to open this up for more questions if we have any, because I'm sure you guys are dealing with people and they have different things. I can tell you that one of the biggest things that we're seeing right now is all the sexual assaults. And that just puts all the trauma into a whole new level of crazy. And we're not going to talk about these assaults per se, but if you have any questions, we're going to open the floor up. Avi, are you okay with that?
So we actually have another question, if it's okay to ask in the chat.
Yeah.
Alexander, would you like to ask a question by yourself, or should I read it for you?
У мене питання і до двох лекторів наших.
I have a question to both speakers. If we're talking about crisis interventions, and if we're talking about guilt, so I guess we're talking about those actions that are value-driven. So something that people can do even if they are tormented by guilt. So these are actions in line with their values, right?
Not so sure I understand the question.
Let me try to interact now and explain it a bit.
Yeah, because I'm not sure I understood it.
So as I assume, maybe Alexander will just correct me. Is it you said we should take an action? So is it an action towards our values, or is it another action? Alexander, am I right or not?
Так. Напрямку до цінності.
Yeah, so basically the focus here is on actions in line with values or towards values, even if you're tormented by guilt.
Usually, I think most people, that's what's going to help them. But I'm going to ask. If somebody's going to say, I'm going to ask him, what do you want to do about it? And he's going to say, I think I want to help. I want to help this lady. Okay. And I'm going to ask him, okay, helping this lady is going to help you how? What do you see? What value do you see in it? Right. And he's going to tell me the value. And usually when you say it, you have it. Okay. I'm not going to assume. I think my baseline assumptions for all of my work, I have no idea what's going on for people and what their assumption is, because people are complex human beings, especially in times of war. So I don't know. I'm going to ask them. And I will push them to action, because the research is showing that in times of stress, when people are working and they're doing things, especially things that are aligned with their values and things that make them feel like they are valuable, then they are actually accomplishing more. And at the end of it, there is a very good possibility that they will not develop PTSD. Okay. there's a very good possibility that their mental state is going to be better and they're going to be more resilient. That means, it does not mean, I'm sorry, that they are going to forget the war. It does not mean they're not going to have moments when they're going to break, but they're going to be overall more resilient and they have better chances to survive this thing mentally. I hope this answers. Avi, do you want to add?
I mean, when I was listening to Alexander's question, I was imagining what would happen if a well-meaning person would come and tell that person what to do, as opposed to interviewing them. And, you know, as a professional, we talk about this sometimes as being client-centered, trying to go with the person, seeing where they're at. Like Ayelet's talking about, interviewing them, trying to get down to the bottom of what's meaningful to them. You know, seeing what helps them to operate. And then once we kind of unveil what that is, we can replicate it more because we've helped the person understand how they connect to what's going on. And if I would just walk up to that person and give out jobs without going through this process of trying to help him find out what he wants to do and needs to do, it may not be as ideal. That being said, I can imagine a situation, maybe a chaotic situation, where it's difficult to interview the person. Maybe they're not interested. Maybe you can't have that conversation. Maybe you're not in that role to be the person that they trust. Ayelet, what would you think, you know, about just in general? You're in that gymnasium in Bulgaria with all the people, or you're in a big movie theater in Ukraine somewhere, and maybe you're there as an aide, helping all the people and all the families taking shelter there. What if you would keep people busy and, you know, give them jobs in general without that interview? And I think this is a little bit what I was talking about before about a schedule, having people being productive, being creative, using different parts of themselves so that they're not just sitting and dwelling with their guilt and dwelling with their fears. I think that's one part of what we're talking about. But then I think another part of what Ayelet was really talking about is helplessness versus a feeling of control. And that's something that Ayelet has been really emphasizing a lot. So I think when we're talking about getting people to do stuff, I guess we're thinking about, why do we want them to do stuff? What are we trying to fix? What are we trying to accomplish? If we're trying just in general to do an intervention to make people have a fulfilling day within the hell of what's going on, and to have kids sing songs together and draw and dance and whatever you can do in a shelter stuck under the bombing in Ukraine, that would serve one purpose. But again, doing a very particular tailored individual to somebody to move him from helplessness to helpfulness and control, it would probably involve what Ayelet's talking about, the detailed interview with that person. Those are just thoughts that have come to me.
I think being accurate is number one. That's the key. So anything that I do, every time I talk to someone, I'm trying to be as precise as possible to know exactly what they're talking about, which means I'm going to have to ask them questions and not assume. And when I do that, usually people have the answers. They know themselves well enough, and they know what they want, and they know why they do the things they do. If you ask somebody why they're crying, they're going to say, well, like last night, I asked someone, why are you crying? She said, well, I'm crying because of the shooting. Didn't you hear? What do you mean? What a stupid question. And I said, I understand that there was a shooting, but why are you crying? Not why everyone is crying and why crying is normal. What are you crying about, like right now? And then she looked at me and she said, because I'm really, really scared. I am super scared. And then I didn't leave it alone. I asked, what are you scared about? What are you scared of? Because she could be scared of another shooting to happen. She could be scared of this and that. And she looked at me and she said, I'm scared that I just lost my freedom to walk the streets of Tel Aviv safely. Like I'm scared that that's just what happened to me. Like, okay. Sit with it for 2 seconds. And let's talk about what we're going to do, because you actually came here. So you were able to come here somehow. Okay, so there's a way to do it, but what I'm saying is you want to ask enough questions to make people give you the answer. Your job is not to know the answer. I don't know why God did what he did. I want to know why you care, why it bothers you so much. What would it give you if you have that answer? What would happen if you have that answer, right? So that little interview looks like that. If you would know why God did what he did, what would happen in your life? I'll have order, I'll have faith, I'll have a future. I don't know what people are going to say, okay? But these kind of questions are great tools to be able to kind of go to the bottom of it and to have people, it's not about what I say, it's about what they're going to hear themselves say. That's where your cue is. That's where your answer is. I hope that makes sense. Okay.
Sounds like you're really unpacking it, getting down to the bottom,
Yep, always.
and then activating them.
Any more questions? I know everybody's tired and it's late, but still.
Can I just comment on what you said?
Absolutely.
I'm actually working with people who are in the different stage. Some of them were abroad when the war started. Some of them were in Ukraine, but then moved to the Western Ukraine or left Ukraine. And some people lost their job and feel helpless because they moved from the more dangerous area to a safer area. But what I see is that the group of women that is doing the best in this war is this group of women who work on a hotline. It's basically 911 line. They help to coordinate the rescue teams to get people out of the collapsed buildings. They help to find kids who've been lost during evacuation. They help to coordinate the humanitarian aid. They do PFA over the phone. These women, I mean, I'm just honored to work with them and to listen to them a couple of times a week because I get inspired and I'm kind of supposed to support them, but I think I'm getting a lot from them. But what I can say, mentally, like in overall their state, they're doing the best of all the people I've been talking to. Because we started to work with them when the war started. They were actually in the eastern Ukraine, so our work was going like we were talking, and all of a sudden the connection breaks for one of them, and there is bombing there, and I don't know if I'm going to see them again. And now they are more or less in a safer place, but I can say that, and they were saying that explicitly, that we were I work for an NGO, and we were supposed to kind of help them to do some self-care, to stress the importance of the self-care. And they said, no. Our role is very important for us. What we do, please listen to us. We want to talk about the calls we get, and they can have about 300 calls per day. And it's their personal phones. So they work I don't know, a lot. But I'm really privileged to work with this group of women. And their mental health condition, of course, they do have these moments of crying and everything, but they are just the example and illustration to everything that you've been saying today, so far. Yeah.
Once you have a role that has to do with the event, it really is like that. You have to have a role that has to do with what's going on. And when you do, you don't feel helpless. You feel like you're doing something. You get some control back. When that happens, your mental state is already different, and you are walking towards resiliency rather than victimness, right? So that's kind of what we're looking at. But I want to say something about something that you just said. You're going to see, my concern here right now for you guys is secondary trauma, because you're exposed to a lot of horror stories, okay? And burnout, because you're working around the clock, and so are a lot of other people. Now, when we're dealing in times of war, this is the timeline. I can't tell you, listen, this is a good time to eat the healthy foods and do the yoga and whatever. It's not going to happen, okay? It's not going to happen. Your self-care right now to make sure that your work is, that you have a role. This is really actually what's keeping you safe, I think, mentally. But how do you know when it's too much? How do you know when too much is too much? It's when you have those peaks. You want to pay attention to your peak Some days you feel more exhausted than others. And some days you feel, I guess, more frustrated and hopeless than others. Pay attention to those times, because remember, we measure ourselves with our baseline. That's what we do with our clients. That's what we do with ourselves. Think about yourself and your baseline. And if today you're really at the place where you cannot stomach it, it's too much, take a break. Before you take a break, ask yourself, what has been too much today? What exactly was it? Okay, and the reason I'm saying it is because you want to be very specific about where it sits. What was that little thing today that broke you? Because if you find that thing, it's only one thing. And if it's the accumulation of things, again, you state what it is. When you know what it is, you can deal with it better. Okay? These are the stages that you have to go through. So in times of war, you cannot just say, you know what, I'm burnt out. I think I'm going to take a month off. Good luck to you people in the Ukraine. And not going to happen, right? I'm going to go have my salad, and I think I'm just going to go for a facial. Also not going to happen. Okay. So this is a good time for you guys to say, this is my baseline. This is where I'm at today. Not good. What exactly happened, right? Pinpoint it, because if you can pinpoint it, you can deal with it. Be very aware of secondary trauma, super aware of those symptoms. If you're starting to have flashbacks of someone else's story, we're in trouble. For those of you that identify very much with the stories, if you're starting to see those images in your head, in nightmares or in flashbacks, or kind of going through the story of one of your people that you're talking to, but you can see yourself in that story, you want to take a time out, because you're marching towards secondary trauma. Okay? I've heard enough stories, I've seen enough therapists at this point that are having a really hard time. Again, this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. The Ukraine is going to need roughly 2 years to recover from this thing, if I'm reading the map right. Okay? It's going to take time. Kids are more resilient, they're going to do better and faster. But for people that just lost everything, this is going to take time. So they're going to need you for minimum of 2 years. So burning out right now is not going to help. Okay? Okay. So more questions if you have them.
What you were saying before, Ayelet, just reminds me of a psychologist in America named Dan
Це мені
Siegel.
нагадало про психолога.
Siegel would say this line, if you can name it, you could tame it. Because if we don't stop and be specific, which is what Ayelet's talking about, then it's just very ambiguous and it just sits around and we just carry it around. And so if you can name it, you could tame it. That's a really easy way to remember part of what she's talking about.
Right. And there's a question here in the chat. It says that while when the war started, people feel tiredness, fatigue, and can't work as usual. Do you have the same? And how do you cope with it? Yeah, I have the same. When this place turns into a war zone, we're working 24/7, and it's very exhausting. The way I do it is I ask myself, what is that one thing or two things that make me feel good, that help me out throughout the day? Okay, I find one thing or two things that work for me. And one of them is my gigantic dog that sits right here. And another one is my kiddo that sits over there. Okay, so I find those little things, and it doesn't need to be big. It really doesn't, because I think big things are never going to happen during a war. Have small things that make you happy. Okay, a cup of coffee, a good one. If you appreciate it, it helps. People are going to be tired. Okay, fatigue is just a part of it. Compassion fatigue, that's a different story. Okay, if you got yourself to a stage of compassion fatigue, that means that you are on your way to having a really tough time and you need to slow it down. Secondary trauma, compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, and burnout. Okay, those are things that, you know, are the flip side of self-care. We really need to look at them and to know what to do with them if you want to take care of you guys. Maybe this needs to be our next topics, our next talk. Maybe that needs to be the topic, because I have to start focusing on the therapists, really, I think.
I can add on to what you said, Ayelet. Going back to just what we spoke about before, what I said about doing things to make a schedule, part of the idea of that was trying to find a way to restore a sense of normalcy. And when we find ourselves completely out of it and the sky is falling and the world is crumbling down, and Ayelet was talking about finding something that is going right, whether it's her dog, her child. I could tell you a lot of times when I've come back as a medic or doing psychological first aid from some really bad calls, terrible things. You know, coming back and seeing even the smallest thing. Maybe you come to a shelter wherever you are and you see two children playing in the corner with some rocks they found on the floor, and they're playing with soda caps back and forth, and you see children playing, and it restores a sense of normalcy. Or you see a mother holding a baby, nursing a baby, it restores a sense of normalcy. You see a person eating some food. So while you see that person eating the food, that might not be something that's a usually interesting thing to watch. But for me, when those times are hard for me, I'm seeing a person eating. That's a very normal thing. It's a neutral thing. There's still some neutrality around me. There's still some safety and normalcy around me. And that's a restorative thing for me. That helps me to reconnect to the good around me, to the small, subtle, mundane things that are neutral. Because when we work with trauma and we're over our head with our trauma, and then with secondary trauma, like Ayelet's talking about, we only see bad. We're only hearing the worst stories in civilization, one after the other after the other. And when we get compassion fatigued and burned out and traumatized, that's when our mind starts to think, there is no good. Everything is bad. Everything is terrible. And it's helpful to look around at the exception to the rule next to me, to this, to that, to those small things. It doesn't have to be anything big or crazy. Anybody else? Any questions?
I just heard a great idea to do a webinar for professionals like psychologists.
Yeah, I told you, Aliona, I told you, we're with you as long as this takes. So
seriously, like, thank you so much for that.
Yeah. Helping children cope with war challenges of war in Ukraine in English. I see that there's some stuff on the chat for people, you know, giving some ideas of where you can get some information of how to deal with things. I want to say something about mindfulness and guided meditation and stuff like that. So there are two sides to this thing. One is there are great techniques when it comes to mindfulness, be able to decrease stress, right? Because stress sits in the body. We talked about it in the first one. Really sits in the body, and there are many, many ways to kind of calm ourselves down and go back to normality, to feeling somewhat normal. I want to say, however, okay? However, it really depends on where these people are. Because one of the situations that we're dealing with is people that are under fire, and in a war zone, your survival brain is not going to calm down, because this is what it needs to do right now. It needs to survive. This is money time for the amygdala. Okay, this is where it shines, and this is where it kicks in. So if I'm in a survivor hat, not a survivor, I'm sorry. If I'm, right now I'm trying to survive, and this is my survivor's brain, if this is my amygdala, then I am not going to sleep very well. The reason I'm not going to sleep very well is because I need to survive and I need to stay alert. So the sometimes to do the especially the hypnosis piece of it, we want to be very careful with it, because the signaling, or what we're saying to the brain really is, I need you alert. No, I don't. Right now you need to shut down. Right now I need you alert. We just want to know that we're using it wisely, and we're using it at the right time in the right space. Because if we are, we find, at least in a war zone, that if we psychoeducate people and explain to them what happens in their body, that their heart is going to do some palpitations, and they're going to have some this and that, and adrenaline is going to go up. When we explain that, a lot of the times that helps more than many other things. And some breathing exercises is super helpful. But I don't go to the hypnosis piece of it, just because I want to make sure, because they are in a war zone, I want to make sure that they stay alert. Okay, so I'm just gonna put it out there. I'm not an expert on it, so I'm not gonna say that I am. I'm not. So if it works for people and it's good for them, you can always offer it and see how it works, what it does for them. But in a war zone, it's a tricky thing. That's all I'm saying. Okay, because we want your survival and your alertness to be there for you if you're under attack. If you're in Bulgaria, if you're in Poland, if you're in Romania, this is a great time to do it. It's a great time to do it, because this is a good time to tell the brain it's time to calm down. But if I'm in Kiev and I'm in Odessa and things are happening, I probably need to stay more alert than none. So just having said that, and again, we're going to take whatever you need to take from it, or not. That's okay too. I want to say that I think it's time to wrap it up, but if I'll look at the chat. I don't think we have any more questions. Awesome. If you want to say thank you so much for coming and for being here and asking questions. This is super helpful. Hoping to have another one again, and we're keeping close contact with Aliona, and to see if there's any more. Again, have questions, write them down, see if you can send them to us, whatever it is that you need. And I hope that next time I see you guys, the war will be over.
Is it okay if Valentina asks the question now?
Yeah.
Valentina?
Hi, Ayelet. It's less than question, but more our gratitude, because your trainings are so good, and my dear colleague Mirav from Israel helped us to join your trainings, and that's really nice. I'm a president of Ukrainian Association of CBT, and you know, since the maybe 10th of March, we are so in touch with your association, and that's you know, it feels like we have like the most biggest friends at like Polish association than your association. So and I you know, I heard a lot from my colleagues about your charm, your charisma, your professionalism, and now I finally managed to, you know, to meet you, and it's such a pleasure, real pleasure. So thank you again. Thank you on behalf of all our community. And so we hope that your energy, your inspiration, your wise messages are really helpful, because for me, I already like, you know, have some insights in my heart.
Thank you so much. I really humble. Thank you.
Thank you, Valentina. And I also want to say that I agree with Valentina, and we really have this feeling that you, Ayelet, is our really favorite speaker, with the Avi as well. And it's just
You could be the most favorite. It's okay. I took her too for a reason. I have the same feeling from her as well.
Thank you so much. It's just great, actually. We have a third webinar, and we have so many people here, and as well we have many people who asked for the recording because they couldn't attend. So seriously, thank you so much, both of you, for your great job, and it's amazing.
Thank you, Aliona, for everything that you're doing for the community. You're doing so much.
We will send word again and give you guys the next link for the next one, and hopefully people will get the recording, and I hope it helps.
Yes,
Awesome.
I also want to thank Aliona Plotnikova. She's my right hand in Israel. Like she's my friend here, but with connecting us. And I know how much work she's doing, and also in front of all of us, I want to, applaud her. And of course, our great translator also. So thank you, Olga.
That's what I
It's
also
nice.
wanted to say. That's why I spotlighted you. You're amazing.
All right. All right, people. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Stay safe. Be well, everybody. Thank you for coming again.
Be safe.
Bye-bye.